Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Freeman, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the lecture we'll be hearing from this afternoon. Anna Post is Emily Post's great-great-granddaughter and an author, spokesperson, and presenter for the Emily Post Institute. Raised in Charlotte, Vermont, she is a graduate of Phillips Andover Academy and holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Vermont. After graduating from UVM, Ms. Post attended the Emily Post Business Etiquette Train the Trainer program and now conducts seminars across the United States for corporations including Deloitte & Touche, the Hyatt Corporation, and the National Institutes of Health. Prior to becoming a fifth-generation Post presenter, she worked for the Motion Picture Association of America and also in the D.C. office of Senator Patrick Leahy. In addition to these achievements, she is the author of Emily Post's Wedding Parties and is a popular source for national media outlets on modern etiquette dilemmas. A contributor to the Huffington Post, Ms. Post also writes about etiquette in the 21st century in her blog, What Would Emily Post Do? We are very grateful to have her today, and would you all please join me in welcoming Anna Post.
All right, well, thank you very much. Oh, there's the mic. Thank you very much for having me this afternoon, for coming out. The rain sounded rather torrential a little bit earlier, so I hope it lightened up for all of your journeys here today. Thank you very much to having me to the Rockefeller Center and to Dartmouth College. It's a pleasure to be here back again. It's always a treat to get to come someplace so close rather than flying all the way across the country. I like getting to work in what I would call my larger community here at home. It's very, very nice. Thank you also to Brian for the lovely welcome. I'd like to ask anybody at this point, if you have a cell phone pager, anything with an alarm, it beeps, if you could turn it off for the duration of the program, I would certainly appreciate it. And other than that, I would just like to suggest that even though we do have a question and answer section at the very end, if you have a question, a comment, something during the course of the program in context that you'd like to ask or comment on, I'd be very happy to hear about that and to incorporate it in. And I'll probably just repeat it back for the sake of the microphone. So with that said, welcome, and let's go ahead and get started with today's program. So we're going to be talking about business etiquette for the digital age. Although many of these things, while it will serve you very well in your business careers, will also serve very nicely in your personal lives as well, but we will focus a bit on business for today. So for today, I'd like to get started with a poll that the Associated Press and Ipsos did a couple of years ago, and they asked some questions about etiquette in America today. One of the first questions they asked was, are Americans ruder today than 20 or 30 years ago? By a show of hands, what do you think in the room here today? Yes, are we ruder than 20 or 30 years ago today? Show of hands, show them right up there. Oh yes, okay, tough crowd here today. The poll showed that about 70% of people felt that this was true, which usually correlates, I ask this question in every seminar I teach, usually correlates with the show of hands that I see in the room here today. That tells me, as someone who works with etiquette day in and day out, something very interesting. The word perspective comes to mind to me when I think about this. I think if we were to go back about 20 or 30 years and ask another generation the same question, we would probably get the same answer. And back before that again and again, if we took a starting place of 200 years ago and we got 70% worse with each generation, I think we would be in a great deal of trouble at this point, and I don't think it's come to that. I think that etiquette changes over time as we move along. New parts of etiquette, new parts of our daily lives call for new etiquette. Take cell phones, for example. 10, 15 years ago, it was anarchy with cell phones. And it's still a little rough today, as we'll see in just a moment, but much, much better. There's an understanding about where and when we use them and how we choose to use them that we will talk about today as people have wanted a response to this new technology. And I think that that is just a part of how we evolve as a society. The poll then turned the question a little more inward, and it asked people individually on a frequent or occasional basis, do you encounter people using their cell phone rudely? Show of hands, yes or no? Yes. Yes, okay, pretty much the whole room here. The poll wound up with 89% of people, which I have to tell you, I would really love to know who the 11% were that did not respond to this, because frankly, I think we've all seen it at one point or another. We see this out and about wherever we might be, somebody speaking too loudly or chatting even quietly on the phone, but while they're checking out at the supermarket, instead of paying the sales clerk a little bit of respect by giving them their attention as they go through the checkout. They turned the question around and asked people if they themselves had used their cell phone in a rude or annoying manner in the past month. Now, I promise that we will not take any names, but does anybody see that in themselves here today? One or two brave souls in the back behind the camera. The poll came up with 8% of respondents said this. There have been a few other polls as well. Intel did one recently that asked generally the same questions. It was a slight variation, but the results were about the same. The numbers say that we see this kind of rudeness much more easily in others than we see it in ourselves. And I'm not surprised by that, and I don't think that it's intentional either, by the way, because I don't think that, just the way that I don't think 89% of people are seeing 8, I don't think that those 8% who are willing to admit it in themselves or see it in themselves, which are two different things, I don't think that it's intentional. I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to be rude today, or this just doesn't matter, I'll behave however I like. I think instead what happens is we get wrapped up or in our lives, we get hurried, we get stressed, and we lose a little bit of awareness on how our actions are affecting all the people around us, especially as our lives are played out so much in public these days. And business is demanded of us so much of the time at any hour of the day. Those lines, I think, start to blur, and so does our awareness. So one of the big goals for today is to heighten that awareness, because good manners are well and good, but they don't do us any good if we're not actively using them. So that's part of what today will be about as we talk about manners for the digital age. Talking about today's goals, think before acting. Basic, right? Very essential. I think it's one of the key components to good etiquette. When we have some forethought, some awareness of a situation before we go into it, we're a bit mentally prepared, we're thinking about things, I think the potential for everything to go very smoothly is quite high. On the contrary, say for example, you were running late. The first words out of your mouth as you walk into a meeting are most likely to be, I'm sorry, or excuse me, I'm sorry I was late. It's best, I think, to start out on our strongest foot. Thinking before we act helps us to avoid from ever having to recover from a situation, a gaffe, a rudeness, whatever it might be in the first place. Secondly, I think we want to make choices that build relationships. And we're going to talk more about this word relationships in just a moment. But this is a very core part of etiquette to me. And it has been to my family going back to Emily 5 generations ago. It wasn't about what fork to use, and Emily never crooked her pinky as she held a teacup in her life. That was not what was of paramount importance to any of us. It's much more about how we interact with one another and the choices that we make as we look to build relationships. And personal lives, I think we certainly want to have good relationships with people there. Business, too. I think we're most successful when we develop good relationships with people in business. And thirdly, to do it sincerely. We'll talk more about this in just a moment, but I think the first two are only effective, not just most effective, but really only effective when we do these things from a genuine, sincere place. So I want to take just a moment and ask, when all of you heard about the program for today and you saw etiquette in an Emily post, what kind of words or associations did you have for the word etiquette? This is always one of my favorite questions to ask people. If anybody wants to call out a couple, I'll repeat them for the microphone. I've heard them all. What's that, good manners? Yes, that's one of the first that I always hear is manners or good manners. Absolutely. Anyone else? Rules. Usually social rules or rules of conduct. I heard code of conduct at a seminar earlier today. I think those are very much a part of what etiquette's all about. Anyone else? Proper. Yes, to do things correctly, the proper way. To do things the way that we've been taught to do them, that we're expected to do them. What else? Common courtesy, the basics of life, the things that we should all know, the way that we handle our interactions with another person, so that if I were to walk up to Brian and go to shake his hand, Brian will shake mine back rather than leaving me hanging. These are so simple, we almost don't even think about them anymore until there's a hiccup and they don't happen. It's when they don't happen that's where all of our focus goes to that sort of social gaffe, and they can be quite obvious, like the failure to shake a hand. This is such a fundamental one. It could be failing to say thank you. It could be much more serious ones as well, serious gaffes that occur. To me, etiquette is fundamentally about how we interact with other people. I mentioned that a moment ago, and I come back to it again because I want to show you what Emily Post back in 1922 had to say about etiquette. Here's Emily with two of my uncles in their younger days. She said, whenever two people come together and their behavior affects one another, you have etiquette. She also said that etiquette is not some rigid code of manners. It's simply how persons' lives touch one another. And many of you may be thinking, this is not the etiquette that I heard about from my mother at the dinner table about elbows and knives and forks, and wow, this is really quite different from what I was thinking about. And those things I do think are very important. I think of those often as manners, which are very much a part of etiquette. I think of it as the sort of social standards, the expectations, the rules that we were talking about so that we know how to go through our daily lives without offending others. And it's not just about offending them, it's also about showing them respect, paying them respect of these common courtesies, taking those actions to do these things. So in addition, when you think about etiquette, she mentions up here, when two people come together and their behavior affects one another, how persons' lives touch one another. It's always about two people. I don't think that you're rude in a room by yourself. I think you have to have someone to be reacting to it, to be responding to it, to be interacting with. And so very much it's about the choices we make in any interaction, whether you know someone or not, whether it's someone in your personal life or in business. And as we talk about those for the digital age, we're going to start to see the transition from what happens when it's a face-to-face meeting, someone that you know, to someone at the end of an email, a cell phone call, on a social network, Twitter blast. It starts to feel very impersonal, and yet there is still a very personal result from the end of these interactions. So I wanted to give you a bit of a basis from where it comes from to help show you how it transitions to where we're going. Principles of etiquette are something that we talk an awful lot about at the Emily Post Institute. And I could rattle these off in my sleep. In fact, I probably do. Consideration, respect, and honesty. There are certainly other principles of etiquette that I would be happy to discuss and to hear thoughts about. These are the three that we've really winnowed it down to over the years. Emily talked about these herself long ago. We've continued that tradition because, quite frankly, they're very timeless. They don't disappear. Unlike chaperones, she dropped those out of the book in 1946, thank goodness. This is something that is much more timeless and crosses cultural boundaries. These are very fundamental to the way that we like to treat people as a society. And I want to talk to you a little bit about my definitions for these, although there's certainly other ones as well. Consideration, thinking about others, having empathy. Consider the situation in its whole might be another way of thinking about it. This speaks again to the awareness that we were talking about earlier. The only way you can consider others is if you're aware of them and thinking about how things may affect them. Respect, choosing to act in a way that builds rather than tears down. Well, what does that mean? I think it means that as we have these interactions, these relationships with other people, whether it's a small interaction with a sales clerk or a much larger one with a major client or a boss or a colleague, as we have those, we want to always be making the choices that are going to advance that relationship, to help it to grow, to give it the best chance of success for our own sake as well as for others. Respect is also about respect for self, too. The last one I want to mention is honesty. I think it's acting sincerely, it's being truthful. I think the first two just don't fly without the last one. I think it's very key that when we take these actions and when we are considerate, let me put it another way, people aren't stupid. We know motives for things being done. I think we can all picture the classic stereotypical idea of a car salesman, for example. They sound considerate and concerned for you and respectful, and we don't always necessarily buy it because we know what's really going on, a very different motivation. Not to offend all the wonderful, upstanding car salesmen out there, of course. But you get the idea of what we're talking about. And so when we start to look back on the goals that I outlined a few minutes ago for today, it's essentially what I think of as etiquette being placed into action in our daily lives to help us achieve these three things. So with that being said, I want to talk for a moment about etiquette in the workplace, and then we're going to dive directly into how all of this affects the digital age. I want to run through these statistics relatively quickly because I think there's a lot of fun things to come in a moment, but it's good to understand why it's worthwhile as a business and as an employee to be investing in etiquette. Sometimes people say, oh, come on, you know, nice guys finish last. You know, that's what etiquette is, right? It's just being nice and polite. Isn't that the fluffy extra? I disagree. I think it goes hand in hand with being incredibly successful. I think you can be very assertive in business. And I said to a group earlier today that I like to distinguish that from aggressive. I think you can be very assertive in business and still be extremely successful. In fact, I think that the most successful people are able to marry the two without compromising any success or skill or advancement at all. I think it only serves to help you in the long run. So as we look at a study that the University of North Carolina did recently, they asked a study group some questions about civility, uncivil acts that might be committed against you in a workplace. And we're not talking discrimination that requires legal action here. That's a very different subject. We're just talking about basic incivility. Somebody didn't say hello. They took my parking space. They didn't refill the coffee pot. I mean, these are some of the most basic ones, but I think you get the idea here. And it can also be rudenesses, just treatment of another person, speaking down to them, being belittling of another person, I think are where many of these manifest themselves. Of 775 of the people who said that yes, an uncivil act had been committed against them, 28% lost work time avoiding the instigator, 53% time worrying was work time lost, decreased work effort, 22%, and anyone who works in HR, their jaws drop when they see this number. 12% actually left their job. We're not talking about they left their job because they couldn't do it, they weren't tough enough to swim in the fish pond that we're talking about here. They left because they just didn't want to deal with this uncivil workplace anymore. These are people who are perfectly qualified. Anyone in HR will tell you how expensive it is and how much time it takes to train someone new. This can have effect on recruitment, as we'll see in just a moment. This is a very big cost to business. It's not all bad news either, but it's worth mentioning that the instigator in most of these cases, the study found, was someone who's likely to know that their job is safe, and usually someone who is very valued or somebody of higher status. They know that they're not going anywhere. It's typical bully syndrome, I mean, to put it quite frankly. The study also showed that all of these, of course, are for behaviors that can be prevented. Difficulty in recruiting and poor retention are two that speak a lot to reputation, as these kinds of rumors about how people are treated in business can get out, and why it's important, I think, for both businesses and employees, managers, to be aware of how insidious incivility can become. To flip it around, though, I want to mention just quickly, I'll put both of these up, a Gallup poll that speaks to the positive side of all of this in terms of retention, customer loyalty, productivity, profitability. The bottom line is that while people may join a company, I think we've all heard this one before, it's often the manager, the people, the interaction that's what causes them to move on. Not in all cases, but in many. So I think it speaks again to how much the way we choose to interact and relate with people around us can affect our business and our work situation. So a couple of general office manners that are of the more traditional side, and the next slide we're going to look at some more modern ones that still hold true today. I've been talking about avoiding incivility or being polite in the workplace. Well, what do I mean? The ones that come through on polls again and again are the basics, these basic social standards that seem so obvious we all know them, but again, doesn't do us any good if we're not using them. Greet each other with a smile, respect each other's privacy, knock before entering, focus on your colleague when you are meeting. I think giving someone your attention is one of the best ways to demonstrate respect for them. Being on time, identifying yourself on the phone, picking up after yourself. These are all basic courtesies, ways to show that we care about the workplace that we're in, we care about our colleagues, it matters. Oh, and by the way, one that's not on here that I hear a lot, I get questions about this one, is saying hello to people in the morning. Now, you don't have to be fanatical with a checklist and go around and do this. It should be natural. Of most concern to people is who says hello to whom first, the person entering the room or the person who was already there. This is of paramount importance to many people, and I will tell you right now that I don't care who says hello to who first. Excuse me for the mic. I don't care who says hello to who first. It really doesn't matter. It should be natural, it should be genuine, it should be spontaneous, rather than forced. And for some people, this matters more than others. If you're one where it doesn't matter so much, I just want to let you know it does matter to other people, so I suggest putting it into practice. It's not going to hurt you at all, and it may help smooth things with some colleagues. So for all the people out there who ask me questions, that was for you. Some modern office manners to show you where a lot of this is starting to shift. The most popular ones that I get today as we start to enter more of a digital age. Don't use IM or email to avoid a problem. We'll see a little bit more of that later on down the line. But many people will use it as a buffer, as a way to avoid a problem, to not make it too personal to them. And interestingly enough, when people pick up a phone, or better yet, see someone in person to resolve an issue that starts to develop over electronic communication, it tends to resolve much more quickly, even though the easiest thing might feel like to avoid the problem by just sending an email and not having to see this person who's upsetting you or making you concerned that they're upset with you, whichever way that might go. Keep cell phones off or set to vibrate or silent. Take personal calls in private areas. Keep shared calendars up to date and free of private appointments. I had somebody ask me recently why it didn't matter on a shared office calendar, or rather, excuse me, why it did matter on a shared office calendar, that she keep her doctor's appointments, for example, and the details of them off of the shared office calendar. She said, well, it doesn't matter to me if people know about it. I said, well, just because you don't mind, other people don't necessarily want to see that and to know about it. Again, that awareness of how it might affect others. These things sound small and simple, but it's one more way in which they manifest themselves. Lastly, using salutations, please, and thank you in emails. For some people, it doesn't matter at all. For others, it does. It's worth practicing it, just making it a habit. It will never hurt you. It will only ever help you. So I definitely recommend those as a general habit. So, looking much more in detail at the digital age, let's take a look at email, which is one of the first great bulkheads of our digital age in business. I want to take a look at a question. I've had this in so many different various forms over the years. This is a sort of a generic boiled down of it. It's been a difficult week. Finally, you get home, and in an email, you vent to a friend who's a coworker about your boss. The next day, you realize your friend, your coworker, has sent you and everyone else in your office, including your boss, a reply. You would do what? What might you do? Would anyone like to volunteer what they would do? Or if it's happened to you, what you did do? Yes. You'd move. Get out of Dodge, avoid the whole problem, you would move. Anyone else? No, you just sit stunned, nothing would happen? Yes. Approach the colleague who sent the email. Okay, what would happen in that interaction? Sure. Exactly. Email can be so shared so quickly, you would let them know that you didn't appreciate them forwarding this on. What if it was just a slip, an accident? It's so easy to do these days. You start filling in the field, and it winds up sending to a group instead, and it was a complete mistake, and they didn't mean to do it. One of the first things that people will sometimes say is that they will have a friend, when they go to that friend, instead of saying, I don't appreciate that, they'll say, go recall that message right now. Outlook has that feature. Or you could send an email saying, please disregard my message from previous. What's going to happen if you do that? I don't know about you, but I'm going to go and open the email. I want to know what it says. And Outlook doesn't really pull it away. All it does is send a message after saying, please disregard previous email or something to that effect. There's no way to really, truly draw back and erase an email from someone's computer. You might start work on your resume. Perhaps that's what this woman meant when she said, move, just get out of Dodge. Okay, it's possible. In part, it's there for the laugh, but it is also possible. I said I've heard many variations of this story. One was a close enough source that I actually happen to know it's true, and the young woman was fired by the end of the day. It was an email. She wrote it. She shouldn't have written in the first place. Certainly not from her work computer at work hours. Sent it off, and she started, instead of, unfortunately, to sending it to her friend Peter, she sent it to her boss Peter, and she just hit tab, filled in the line, off it went. She had a box and was cleaning out her desk by the end of the day. So it is possible, but I'd like to think in most situations that we have a chance to recover. Remember earlier we said that we want to think before we act, not make these mistakes to recover from. That's great, but I also live in a real world where I know that this can happen. That's part of what a question like this looks at. Try to delete the message from your boss's computer before she sees it. I had a boss once who was not very computer savvy. I completely could have done this, but there's a big problem with it. When my boss comes in later and someone walks up and says, Sarah, what are you going to do about Anna's email? And Sarah says, what email? I don't have an email in my inbox. Well, yes, you do. You were on it. I can see your name right there. Ooh, now I have two things to explain. One was a mistake. I shouldn't have done it. It was inappropriate, absolutely, but it was a mistake. In fact, it was actually your friend's mistake. It was both of your mistakes, really. But the second one was duplicitous, it was intentional, and frankly, if I was a boss, I'd be much more upset about the second than the first. So I think being honest and sincere, those words we talked about earlier in our efforts for recovery, are very important to our success. The last option, which of course is the correct one, ask to talk to your boss as soon as she comes into the office. This does one thing, it takes responsibility for the action. It deals with the person who's most directly affected by it, the boss. You can't just, much as you might want to move, you can't just leave that hanging out there and never ever address it. Rather than waiting for the boss to come to you, being proactive and going to them. And I would add also with a solution in hand if possible. Some situations you'll be able to do that, others you may not, in which case you might instead say, you know, please forgive me, my email earlier was inappropriate. It's my fault, I take responsibility. How would you like me to handle this? What can I do to make amends? What can I do to repair this? And they may have an option, they may not, but it's much harder, I think, for someone in the boss's position to be very, very upset when you've genuinely come and are looking to repair an honest mistake, as opposed to waiting and not wanting to deal with it and leaving the mistake, you know, for the boss to have to deal with. So owning it and being responsible is very important. I want to talk about a couple of communication guidelines. Some of these could extend beyond email, by the way. The number one, be aware if it's public or private. Bottom line, if you don't want an email posted in the lunchroom, you might not want to be sending it because, quite frankly, it's out of your control once it's gone. We all have good judgment and we all use it. That's not what I'm here today to be teaching. What I want to do is encourage you to use your own good judgment because there are certainly sliding scales with this. There are some emails perhaps that are confidential documents with sensitive numbers or information that of course should never be posted in a lunchroom. It doesn't mean you don't send them as a part of your job, as your business. But on the other hand, there are some, like the one that was probably written in the example right before, that really shouldn't be. And so being aware of this is important. Same goes, by the way, private or public for cell phones and what conversations are appropriate when to be having. Proofread, because focus does go to mistakes. And I should actually add that it's not just proofreading, it could be pronunciation as well of someone's name. You don't have to know these things in advance, but I think it's good homework if you're unsure to call in advance. That's nothing to be embarrassed about at all. In fact, I'd be impressed if somebody did it. Whether it's to find out if an Alex is a man or a woman, to find out how to spell someone's name or how to pronounce it so that you're prepared and are most respectful when you go into a situation, that you're not just leaving it out there hanging to be corrected. It's all right to be unsure. I would just go and fix it first. You don't have to know, just need to find out. Mistakes do reflect on you and your employer. For example, if we had walked in today and my presentation had been up on the board with Dartmouth College spelled this way, how impressed with me would all of you have been? I always have to tell people when I send these out for approval that yes, that's an intentional misspelling on this slide. It is important to check on these things, even if you think you know. It was mentioned in my bio that I spoke recently at the National Institutes of Health. Institutes has an S, which I lived in Washington, D.C. for 5 years, and I never knew that. And I always think with every client, oh, I'm sure I know how to spell this, but I always go to their website and triple check, and I'm glad I did with them because I would have had it misspelled up there for them. So people do notice the mistakes. The focus does draw right to them, which is not where we want the focus. Where do we want the focus instead? We want it on the content that we're there to provide and our ability to make a connection with people in business. We don't want distractions that are going to take away from that. That's why having our etiquette house in order, if you will, is a really great foundation for all of the content and everything else that you might specialize in that you're there to do. Lastly, we've already talked a bit about this. You can't salvage the mistakes that are already out there, the voicemail message that you wish you hadn't left, or the email or the text message that you've already sent and cannot recover anymore. A couple of tips for email communications much more specifically. As we saw clearly with the example a couple of slides ago, you want to let something simmer. And I myself have done this about 2 or 3 times in business where there was something that I was frustrated or upset by, and I chose to let it sit overnight. And I will tell you that the 2 or 3 times that happened, I deleted the email. I've never once sent one that I've let linger because I realized that in the moment I was upset, and it was more about the emotional response than the actual situation at hand. So while I was glad to have vented and gotten it out in the draft, I was also very, very glad to delete it the next day and not to have sent it. Letting something simmer, whether it's overnight or even for 10 minutes, having somebody else come and read it to be sure that it doesn't sound too harsh. Perhaps you're not angry. Perhaps it's just a confusion about something happening. You're worried that your tone might not be what you wish it were. Reading it out loud if there's no one else around is another way to sort of have a little reality check on this. I would also add that it can be for things that are complicated. You may be so into a problem that of course this makes sense to you in this long email. When you're all done, give it 5 minutes, go back. Can you read it from start to finish as though, again, perspective awareness, you haven't seen it, and follow your own thought process all the way through. So I find that to be an incredibly useful tool to avoid then having lots of back and forths clarifying and fixing later on down the road. Again, the thinking before we act. Subject line is your first impression. I'm not going to say too much more than this, but that it is the first thing that a client or a boss or a colleague will see when they get an email from you. So spelling should be correct, the title should be pertinent to the email, and it should have a title. Especially when you get a lot of emails, I'm sure many people here do. Having to go back and search when there's nothing to search against because the form is empty makes it a little bit more difficult. So do have a subject line. Grammar and word choice do matter. Spell check is great, wonderful, but it's not going to tell you the difference between there and there. And these mistakes are as obvious sometimes as a spelling error. And most of us do know them too, by the way. It's not that I think you all don't have good grammar, but get credit for that good grammar. Don't let a focus go to that kind of an error. It's careless, it doesn't need to be there. Let the focus go to the content instead. Be conscious of your voice. All caps is yelling. I think most of us have this one down at this point. You used to, in the early days of emails, see emails come through written all in capital letters. I'm not sure why this was a trend. It's really died away in the last 8 years or so. But you did used to see a lot more of this. Unless you mean to, don't use it, because it is yelling. Emoticons. Isn't that cute, the little smiley face that's up there? I might send that to a close colleague of mine, perhaps while I'm away on a business trip and I have to correct something, but I want her to know that I'm not upset. I might use a smiley face to express that over email where she can't hear my tone of voice or see my face to know that I'm not upset. But that's because I know her very well. When in doubt, which a number of the things coming up apply to, when you don't know your audience, this is the time that you want to be a bit more careful, a bit more formal. Again, use that good judgment that you have. When it's a close colleague, perhaps a client who's close in age to you and you've gotten to know and you feel comfortable with a more casual exchange, that's probably the best response to that relationship at that point, not to stay stiff and formal and far away from it. But you need to be aware of how that relationship's progressing and what level of formality you judge to be the best at that point. So when in doubt, stay away from this. Same with text message speak. Whether it's sent from a cell phone, smartphone, Blackberry, you might be sending it to someone else who reads it on a Blackberry. No biggie. It'll look pretty normal. This is the way things come through, these abbreviated words like this, no capitalization, often no punctuation. What happens when you send that to a 60-year-old client who views it on their big computer screen monitor in their office, and it's this little squawk of a message that looks thrown together, haphazard, barely paying attention? How is that going to be perceived by another person? This goes, I think, especially for intergenerational communication. Digital age, many people later in life are sort of dealing with things that weren't around when they were much, much younger. And their expectations are often more formal. Not in every situation, and that's the key, is that you don't always know. You don't know which 60-year-old is so savvy and uses text message speak him or herself and which one doesn't. And the same could go for someone of a younger generation as well. Just because you're young doesn't always mean that you're informal in business. So I think it's important to, again, use that sliding scale of your own good judgment with these relationships in terms of formality. Whenever in doubt, err to the formal. There's a question, yes?
Was there similar advice about the use of language from telegrams?
With telegrams, the question was, in previous generations, was there similar advice for language with telegrams? Telegrams were expensive, and I believe, don't quote me on this, that they were charged by how long they were. And so being brief in those was actually very understandable, and this was something that was not uncommon. My grandmother, for example, still will not stay on the telephone with me more than about a minute because it was discourteous, it was expensive. So it was ingrained. In that case, I think it was so understood that it was probably very much the norm and quite all right, as we knew why it was happening, since it was cost prohibitive to have things be longer. It's a great question, though. Thank you. Last one that I want to mention here, I've been talking about familiarity, formality. Names, I want to be more specific with it at this point. How should you address someone in business? Am I Anna or am I Ms. Post? And by the way, in business, it's always Ms. for women, MS period, not Miss, MISS, or Mrs., unless you are absolutely positive that this person prefers to go by Mrs. Otherwise, Ms. is the safe deferral, whether they're married, divorced, not married, whatever it might be, you know that one is safe. Using Mr. and Ms. whenever you're in doubt is going to be your best bet. Once you've been invited to call someone by their first name, that's their preference. Respect that and go ahead and do it. But in business, especially if you're dealing with someone a number of rungs up from you, it's a good idea to err to the cautious side, depending again on the culture you're in. How is this helpful? I know I'm giving you so many different sliding variables here. The bottom line with this one is that it's always easier to go from the formal to the informal than the other way back around again. I will say there are some cultures where you can immediately take the temperature and know that it's an informal one and that you won't be calling them by their last name. Use your good judgment. Any other time where you don't have a trigger or an indicator to tell you it's okay, just start formal. Most people will say, no, it's okay, call me Anna. In email, this is not a hard and fast rule, but it can be a helpful hint. If you were to write to me, Dear Ms. Post, and I signed off, thank you, comma, Anna at the bottom, without my last name, that is tacit approval to go ahead and to call me Anna at that point. So that can be a little bit helpful in email as well. Oh, and do use salutations, by the way. When you're emailing, hello or hi. Hi is a little less formal. Hi all, hello all. If there's a lot of people, hi everyone. Those are all good. And then closing. Thanks, kind regards, best wishes. Thanks again, take care, all the best. These are all good ones. Cheers, say for someone you know pretty darn well. And same with warmly or warmest regards. That's much more of a fond one. Every now and then people are concerned about sincerely. It's perfectly okay. They think it's so sort of generic that it's almost an insult, that it's impersonal. It's not true at all. It's a perfectly okay one to use. Yes, there's a question.
In regards to salutations, I get two questions. You said the word dear, as opposed to hi, hello, or dear, like you would in a letter. And then when you're dealing with someone who's start with doctor, so-and-so.
Sure. My recommendation is many people who have a PhD but are not a medical doctor do go by doctor. If there's any indication previous that this is what they prefer, yes, do use it. My recommendation is also that within the context of their job, yes, I would use doctor for this person. And dear is more formal. It's also perfectly okay with a colleague that you know well. Dear Matt, I was wondering about the proposal for March 4th, whatever it might be. That's fine as well. Hi and hello are a little more informal on that one. There's nothing wrong with dear, though. It's okay. It's an all right one to use. Yes, question here.
Salutation Wants the title of doctor to be used, and he is closing or she is closing. Can she indicate such by signing regards and so on? I'll use your name, Anna, post, and then parentheses, put in there whatever you want, Dr., Ms.
I would do Anna Post if I wanted to be called Ms. Not everyone will pick up on these signals, just to warn you about this one now. But if you want to send the signals, I would say Anna Post if I was hoping for a Ms. I would say Anna Post, comma, PhD if I was hoping for a Dr. Post. I'm not a PhD, but if I was. That's how I would seek that. You can also include it in your signature block below, which is usually PhD versus doctor, but I don't think any etiquette police will come after you if you decide to use doctor there, if it's very important to you that this be respected. There's a question here, yes?
In terms of correspondence, is it ever okay or maybe better to drop opening and closing
Great
phrases
question.
if you send an email with those and then you get a reply that's just, a couple sentences
Sure.
and then a name?
Again, you want to move with the flow of the conversation. The question was, should you drop the salutation in the closing if someone replies to you without it? Or perhaps you're on your 10th back and forth on an email chain with someone. By all means, use these for the first 1, 2, maybe 3. And then after that, you don't need to say, Dear Sarah, yes, the number is 10. Thank you again, Anna. You can let it sort of be measured to the length and formality of the email at that point. But within a couple, I think you can start to drop those off, yes, as the exchange becomes much more conversational back and forth. It's a thread of a long conversation rather than a number of communications, if you will, for the difference. That's a great question. Good. We'll do one last one, and then I want to move on in the interest of time.
As part of the Rockefeller Center, we are a little bit more formal, I think, than something. And typically what I do is I tend to be extremely formal with my emails until I get to like the second or third email, and then I sign P's, and then I just put my first name.
Mm-hmm.
But I almost have taken this on as like a duty I feel like I have, is to sort of help students know that this is how you have to correspond with people when you're in the business world.
Sure.
And what's interesting is to see someone go from, hey, Sarah, which is so informal and completely inappropriate, to actually, over time, being a little bit more formal and just actually, using my name correctly. So I think that for some of us, it's really important to model really good email etiquette and texting.
Yes. The comment was about on modeling good etiquette and good expectations with this, and I think that that's very, very true. Setting the standards and the expectation. The business world is more formal than the academic in most cases. There are exceptions both ways, I will completely admit, but on a whole, yes, especially for students who are entering out into more of a corporate business world. It is often more formal. The expectations are a little bit more rigid sometimes. That being said, there was a wonderful example recently in the news. A young woman in Washington, D.C. was being, there was a request in for a meeting with the congressperson whom she worked for. And she gave the person requesting it a very, very hard time when he referred to her in a follow-up message. She hadn't responded to him. And she said, "Hi, Liz, just checking to see if we could get the meeting." And she wrote back, "Who is Liz?" Her name was Elizabeth Becton. If you search it, you'll find it. You can read the whole exchange. It's outstanding, the degree to which she was offended and pursued recourse with this person. It went back numerous times, back and forth. They said, "Oh, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. I thought that's what you went by. My apologies." Nicknames are another one, not to take for granted that you've been invited. If I sign an email Elizabeth, it's not my name, but if it was, if I signed it Elizabeth, then I'd like to be called Elizabeth, not Liz or Lizzie or Betsy or all the other numerous nicknames there are for it. So until you've been invited, especially with nicknames, this one's ironclad. Until you've been invited to call someone by a nickname, stay away from that. So good question. In the interest of time, I want to move on just for the moment, but we will take more questions at the end of the session. Smartphone and Blackberry use. There are so many different devices that are starting to fall under this heading. Technology is a tool. This is what it all comes back to. Frequently, I do media interviews, and the interviewers often ask me, "Well, don't you just think that you must think cell phones are so rude? You work for Emily Post Institute. I said, no, I love my cell phone. I think it's great. It's how we choose to use it that's going to determine whether we're using it well or poorly. A cell phone's not rude when it sits on a table alone. It's the interaction that occurs with it, that interaction, again, that we've been talking about. So know that this is something that you can be in control of. They have off buttons for a reason. We can choose to use those or not to affect how we're perceived by the people around us. To that end, anytime that it may be affecting other people negatively, bothering other people, turn it off, put it on silent, put it on vibrate. Technology has so many answers to this problem at your fingertips. Go ahead and use those. People will greatly appreciate it. Personally, I like the silent mode because I know if a phone call comes in, I'll still see it as opposed to if my phone was off. Avoid using a smartphone or a Blackberry, one that will send emails, one that you could take notes on, in a meeting. I mentioned earlier that giving someone your attention is a way to give them your respect. I think this is especially true with Blackberries in meetings. There's been a number of news articles on this recently. There was the issue with the politician in New York who is being overthrown in part because someone was so offended that they were on a Blackberry in a meeting with them. I know, I don't make these things up. This is what was in the news. But if I was here, even if I was fully paying attention to our conversation and I was tapping away on a Blackberry, no matter how good my answers and my input into the conversation that we're all having here today, where it's undenied that the image I'm sending out, if I could see myself from sitting a little ways away, is that I'm not paying attention. And when that message is being sent, some people want to send it on purpose. You know, is this important enough for me to pay attention to? Well, it was important enough for you to schedule your time for, so I think it's important enough to give the attention. Save the Blackberry for afterwards for later. Lastly, know your audience when you're sending from an email or from a Blackberry. We talked about this a bit earlier, so I'm not going to hammer it home here. But again, just be aware that technology may not display on a computer screen the same way it does on another Blackberry device. So capitalization, punctuation, spelling, complete words, again, are important to use. But it's not wrong to use a Blackberry for all of these things. I think they're great tools. You're between client meetings, you're traveling in the airport. I think these are wonderful ways to stay in touch on the job. The last thing I'll add is that if you, depending on what your office's expectations for your availability are, if your office isn't expecting you to be available at 11 at night, but you respond to Blackberries then, don't be annoyed when you start getting requests at 11 o'clock at night because you've opened that door. Some offices expect it. It's part of why you might have a Blackberry. But know what those expectations are, and then know how you'd like to manage it. And as one of the women here was saying before, model the behavior that you'd like to receive. Help to set those boundaries with this technology. That's part of the beauty of it, is that we can use it as a tool to work for us and for our image. When words alone are your image, the New York Times did a wonderful article about 2 years ago that's still very, very relevant today, talking about all of the science behind what happens in terms of interaction between two people when you remove first the physical presence and you're on the phone and you have only the voice, and then you remove that and you're only on email, and the only signals you have are the exact actual transcript words of your email. So be sure they're the words that you mean, because people might interpret your tone very differently from what you have written out. And in the absence of those facial expressions the article talked about, in the absence of the tone of voice, when there's doubt, people tend, on a whole, to trend toward the negative in interpretation. So when in doubt, people tend to worry and to assume the worst. It's why I mentioned earlier, I think it's best to resolve situations, any difficult misunderstandings, problems, upsets that may occur over email in business by picking up the phone, or better yet, seeing them in person. I think these things tend to resolve themselves most quickly when you have the most amount of input from someone for you to process, to be able to understand what's going on here. So not to avoid a difficult situation with it, and to visit somebody if things become tense. I think it does clear up most quickly. I want to take a moment to talk about thank you notes, because there are some times when I think it's best to hop offline. And for thank you notes, the big question I tend to get, especially in business, is an email, a phone call, or a written note. What is best for a thank you note? Well, I think it depends in part. There are times if you have a casual lunch with someone and you split the check and it was last minute, but you want to thank them for taking the time, phone call, send an email. I don't think that requires, beautiful heavyweight stationery and a handwritten note necessarily. It's not necessarily relative to the situation. That being said, I don't think that handwritten thank you notes are ever wrong. I think it's always a lovely gesture. If you're hemming and hawing, you can't decide what's appropriate, again, err on the side of formality, play it safe, it will never hurt you, write the handwritten note. Especially, I would choose them for gifts, an actual physical gift that somebody might give you in business, substantial favors done for you, special meals. And I say special to distinguish from maybe your every Tuesday luncheon at the burger joint that's very established. We're talking a client dinner, a promotion evening with the boss, or if this is out of the norm for your company, then you might want to send one. Major opportunities, relationship milestones. These are great ways to step offline for a moment with people and make a very personal impact in business. I think especially with clients, or if you're searching for a job, looking for a co-opportunity, maybe it's not exactly a client situation. What do I mean by milestones? The beginning of a new relationship. Dear so-and-so, I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to work with your company. I look forward to achieving our goals. Doesn't have to be very, very long. Again, please feel free to reach out at any time. All the best, Anna Post. That's one thing. You could do it at the completion of a project within a longer relationship. We're so happy that our annual drive for the year is over. We're so pleased to be working with your company, and we're excited for the opportunities for next year. Happy this was a success. Speak with you soon. Can be also at the end of a relationship. It's been a pleasure working with you on this campaign. If I can ever help you in business again, don't hesitate to reach out. Again, it was a pleasure, whatever it might be. Something along these lines. These are great ways to add a personal touch to a relationship. Within a thank you note, well, what do you actually say? Those were a couple of pretty good examples there. Mail within 24 hours of the event or the favor, the opportunity, the gift, whenever possible. I know that's not always possible, so do your best. If you need to, you might send an email as well. Dear John, I know you're off to vacation. I just dropped a note in the mail, but wanted to say thanks again for the opportunity to discuss working with you last evening. Now you've covered both scenarios. If you meet with several people, do send a note to each one. It's not their job to send your note around inter-office memo style, checking the box when each of them has read it. Go ahead, find out their names, even if you have to call, and send an individual note to each person. Does anyone have a question on thank you notes before I move on? Yes?
I know it's obvious why they're so important, but why are they so important?
Why are they so important? Why does this even matter? Why are we going offline? No, it's a great question.
I'm like, well, yeah, they spend all that time to write that, but I know they feel that way.
Sure, you know they feel that way. Not everybody does. And even if I wasn't expecting one, when you open up your mail and you get bills and junk and catalogs and all these other things, to then see that somebody took the time to write a note to you in an age that is so digital, to take a moment to sit and to make this more traditional, formal, personal gesture, it's essentially a flag saying, you really matter to me. And you might already know that, but it's also always lovely reinforcement of this. A way to sort of enhance that relationship. I'll also say for people looking for jobs, et cetera, I know in some of my previous jobs, as part of personnel files, we included them in it. And maybe we'd go back and look at a file 6 months, a year, 18 months later. Along with the resume, there was a lovely thank you note for the last time they interviewed. That just shows well. It's a wonderful tool to sort of have in your arsenal, in your kit when you're out and about in the business world. Overusage can look a bit grasping, so that's why I say you don't have to use them for every single situation. There's a question here, yes?
And so you would use one even after an interview, or
Yes.
personal interviews, or also phone interviews?
Most definitely after interviews, especially for any type of a job. Thank you for the opportunity to interview with your company. I look forward to I look forward to hearing from you. It was a pleasure to discuss X, Y, and Z. It's nice to have something personal, by the way, in that email, in that thank you note, so that it doesn't seem as though it was auto-generated by a computer and mass sent to everyone else getting the same note. Yes, question here. Sure, stationery, both the simple note cards that are plain and do not fold over, as well as a fold over that either says thank you or has a simple design, nothing too flowery, nothing too showy on it. is perfectly fine. The fold-over card, you open up the card and you write on the inside. Do include a date on it, blue or black ink, and handwriting can be either cursive or script. And everyone, no matter how bad their writing is, can write slowly enough and with each letter distinctly enough that it's legible. So by all means, do please handwrite the note, even if you have to go slowly and carefully. We'll do one more question on thank you notes, and then we'll hold a couple for afterwards. Doesn't matter, technically doesn't matter anymore. But what you want to have come out when you pull the note out is ideally when somebody slits the letter and pulls it out, the graphic or the writing would be facing the other way from where you address the envelope, so that as I pull that out, but to be honest, people could open it from either side. It could be done either way. It really is okay these days. Wedding invitations have very, very formal things about this, but it's a little bit looser in business today. So those are some great questions. I want to move on. For the moment, we're lapping just a little bit into the Q&A, but bear with me for a moment. This has been some good conversation. I wanted it to go on. Social networks. This is such a fun topic, and it is definitely the newest. You know, email, we've all been around that block for quite a while now, and see how many questions we still have. But now we're into things like social networks, and how do we use these? What is appropriate is often the first question that I am asked whenever something to do with social networks comes up. What's appropriate to have on? Are these photos okay? Are these kinds of comments appropriate? Who should I be friends with? What is our new social standard for all of this? In part, I'll tell you that it's still developing. But I can tell you a few other more specific guidelines within it. Excuse me. For one moment, though, I just want to shift in terms of speaking about appropriateness. This was a Twitter fiasco that was in the news recently, sometime in the past year. This was a tweet that was sent out by a gentleman at Ketchum PR, which is in the Atlanta, Georgia area. This was all over the news for a while. Some of you may have heard it. They were on their way to visit FedEx, their client, in Memphis, Tennessee, from Atlanta. And this guy, to all of his followers on Twitter, Twitter, by the way, is an online service, I guess you'd call it, where you can write 140 characters total, however many words or abbreviations you can fit in 140 characters, and whoever's following you will see your latest update posted in real time. And this gentleman had some followers, and to them he tweeted, "True confession, but I'm in one of those towns where I'd scratch my head and say I'd rather die than live here." That's my interpretation on his tone of voice, but you know, you pick your own. And someone at FedEx was following him, or was forwarded to them, and they were not impressed that this was how this company that they do so many thousands, probably many, many thousands of dollars worth of business with, I think it might be in the hundreds of thousands, that this was how they spoke about coming to visit their client. Might it have been true? I don't know, Memphis. Maybe it was true. Who knows? Maybe it was how this guy really felt. Was it appropriate? That's the question we're asking. Absolutely not in business. Remember earlier we said if you didn't want it posted on the refrigerator at work, probably shouldn't be there? Same case goes for something like this. Digital is so repeatable, it's intractable. You cannot take it back once it is out there. It's indelible for all that it is so oddly digital and amorphous and can go anywhere at any time. Once it's out, you cannot put it back in the box. So situations like this are very, very important to guard against. Poor guy, I don't think that he genuinely meant to be hurtful, but he was careless, and it did have consequences. Who's who? Let's talk for just a quick moment about what's going on out there. Many of you are very familiar with this. For others of you, this might be a little bit of a new conversation. Facebook and LinkedIn currently, right now, summer of 2009, are the most popular two social networking sites being used. Facebook started as a social network site for your friends, your family, your personal life. It is changing. It is morphing into business as well, both with fan pages and also with business presence as part of your profile, as part of who you are. You're starting to connect to your colleagues, to clients, to people you'd like to reach out to in business. This is a bit newer, and people are wanting to know how to respond. We'll talk about that in just a moment. LinkedIn is purely business. You could be on there for social reasons if you wanted to, but the purpose is for business. It's a little more formal in its structure. It's a little bit more understood. The lines aren't so blurry on it. It's for business, which makes it a nice place for people who are uncomfortable with the idea of blending their social life and their work life to use a social network. But be aware on Facebook that that's starting to change a bit, that those lines are starting to blur. Some classic examples with social networking sites that go across the board, whether we're talking about LinkedIn or Facebook. Although frankly with LinkedIn, it's not usually a concern. You're on there for your business reputation. It's going to be pretty squeaky clean on there. Despite privacy protections, these sites are public. It is always possible that someone will forward something, read something over someone's shoulder, that they'll have access to it. I hear frequently from universities and from corporations that when candidates interview either to be a student or to join a corporation, that part of standard procedure in many places now is to look them up on Facebook and to see what does their page look like, to get more of a sense of who they are and how they represent themselves. So be aware that this may happen for you. To that end, because this can be viewed by anyone, be aware of what it looks like. Take a look at it as though an interviewer or a boss were over your shoulder. Do you still feel comfortable with it? We'll talk in a moment about privacy settings, which can help give you a little bit of a buffer to your private life with it. You are responsible for your page at the end of the day. I was asked earlier by a young woman earlier today, as I start to interview, should I take off all my photos? Well, not necessarily, but you need to be aware that they could be seen by other people. You'd hope with privacy settings that that would be inviolable. I don't want to tell you that it is, because it's always possible. People can save, forward, do things with it without your permission. I'd hope they don't, but it is possible. It's only fair that I let you know that. And the comments that you leave and on other people's pages, these are all things to be aware of. This is part of this new public image that people have that's very fleshed out public image. And it is a newer part of our society. My best advice is, especially as it's still developing, to exercise some caution. Better safe than sorry, I think, is my nutshell rule with some of these. Doesn't mean you don't have fun and don't enjoy it, but you'll never catch me using a swear word. Not that I use them much in my personal life anyway, but you'll never catch me using a swear word on a site like this. It's just not worth it to me if somebody were to see it in my professional capacity, because I would never, ever do it in my professional life. And it's not how I want people to see me or to know me, and so why have it out there for it to slip and happen anyway? To that end, I want to talk about knowing your technology for a moment. This is just a quick education, if you will, especially for Facebook, where there's many more questions about this. If you choose to ignore a friend request or delete a connection, there is no message sent. Well, if I choose to ignore them, they'll get a message saying I ignored them, but I don't want to be friends with them. We're going to look at that in just a moment, a situation about that. Well, what will happen if you feel like you're between a rock and a hard place? No message will be sent, nothing will happen. I'd rather see, if you're uncomfortable making a connection on Facebook, I'd rather see that connection be ignored if you're worried about how it could affect your reputation, or you just don't really know the person and don't want to be connected with them, than to send an email saying, oh, I'm sorry I chose to ignore you. I only want my 20 closest friends. Well, let's not highlight the fact that we're ignoring you after that as these things develop. Learn about privacy setting options. Facebook continues to update these, and they are rather specific in terms of which individual you allow to see which different features. It's very customizable. I suggest you take a look at it if you are using Facebook for business purposes as well. But I would also, again, that overall caveat that there are no guarantees that those privacy settings are the end-all and be-all of ironclad security. It's okay to decline quizzes, IM chats, all of these different sort of features of Facebook if you don't want to participate in it. It's not considered rude to opt out of those. And it's also okay to untag yourself from a photograph or to ask someone to take down a photograph, which are two different things. A tag is essentially a label. When I'm in a photograph, I digitally tag someone, and when a cursor hovers over it, it shows my name, and it links to my page. Someone could choose not to tag me, and the photo might still be up on their page. So those are two different things. And it's okay to ask someone to take it down if it's something that you are upset about. Although I will say that photos are pretty ubiquitous on Facebook, and they tend to just get a generic upload of a whole, Anna's birthday party, whatever it might be. But photos are out there, and it might be possible for someone to post a photo of you on their page. So if you're just uncomfortable with that whole idea, then I might suggest whether you want to be there at all in the first place for that to happen. This question is one that I think I get the most when it comes to business etiquette, or some variation on it. You open up your Facebook account, and you see that your new boss, this could be new client, new colleague that you don't know well, whatever it might be, has sent you a friend request. You feel uncomfortable accepting, but you don't want to start the relationship off on the wrong foot. Maybe you've known them for a while. You don't want to be rude and offend them by keeping them essentially at arm's length, not inviting them into this personal world of Facebook. What do you do in this situation? I just said it's okay to ignore somebody, so I think that's all right. But what I really like, if it's at all business related, is to hop on LinkedIn. If you don't already have an account, you can open one. And either friend that person or connect with that person, is usually the language on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, sort of saying, yes, I want to connect with you over here in LinkedIn for business. I do want to link with you, though, so it's putting the emphasis on the positive over there. And just let the friend request one over here. On Facebook, ignore. Go join on LinkedIn if you're not already. If they're not on LinkedIn, send them an invitation to join LinkedIn. And that, I think, is the best way to respond to the connection in a place that's more specific for business, so it's not intruding into the personal life. But the bottom line question, I think, of a lot of the things that I've just been talking about here, and this is in part a summary of many of the big questions I get, is to ask why you are there. Are you on Facebook to promote a business? If you are, understand that many people may choose not to friend you, since it does have its roots as more of a social organization. Vice versa, if you're there solely for personal reasons, you might want to really up your privacy settings so that you're not searchable if someone goes looking for you, or so that if you connect with somebody who's a boss or a colleague, maybe they're not seeing your whole life as an open book on Facebook. Know what your options are and consider your purpose, why you're there, so that you can best use that technology and all those tools it gives you to make yourself comfortable, and also to send out the kinds of signals you want others to respond to, as we mentioned earlier. Help to set the tone for how you want to use these. So this is sort of an awful lot right now on social networking, and as I said, a lot of it is developing. The last piece that I want to add is a question about boundaries at work, because some offices expect people to network on Facebook or on LinkedIn or using Twitter. How do we know when to draw the line between our office hours, our personal hours? It seems like it's a personal tool. It's one that I use for my own account, but now my boss expects me to connect. How do you start to know what's appropriate and what's not? I think if the purpose that you're on the site at any given moment at work has to do more with business, then yes, this is a part of your job. It's a part of my job at Emily Post. I use a Facebook fan page for the Emily Post Institute that I monitor and manage. I have a blog, I have a Twitter account, I have a LinkedIn account. I developed our company site on our LinkedIn account. So when someone walks by my desk, they know why I'm on these sites. And so rather than taking the time to also check my personal email messages on it, that's when it's time to hop off. I'll also add that you should know your company's policy. My company doesn't mind if I take a quick moment every once in a while to check a personal email. We're pretty easygoing family business in that respect. There are other companies where these sites are blocked entirely because they don't want you spending company time on it. So I would say to know the policy where you are so that you can best respect it. Know also, if your company's asked you to be on these, what their expectations are for how active you are on them as well. Especially for people who aren't quite as familiar, so that it's very easy to open these accounts and then never go back to them again. So expectations are a big part of it. I want to take a few more questions in just a moment, but I want to end on one last note, especially in this digital age where we are so available all the time and in so many different places and ways. I want to talk about being a 24/7 professional and what that means. Bottom line is to know that your actions outside of work can affect you on the job. Does that mean that you go to, the grocery store all dressed up like you were going to a board meeting? No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that at all. But it means that we should be prepared that social situations can shift, or that the expectations of when we're available are set both by office policy and our own boundaries. To know both of those play a factor, play a part in how reachable we are as the digital age permeates in business so much of our personal life. Purely social situations can shift. You might run into your boss while you're having dinner out with your family and need to manage it both ways. Taking a moment to say hello, possibly introducing him or her to the family, but stopping the conversation from going into an in-depth business meeting so that you don't lose time and take your attention away from your family, the people you were scheduled to be with, to instead say, oh, Bob, I'd love to continue this. Could we look at it on Monday when we're back in the office? That's perfectly okay to set those boundaries and to maintain a balance. If you're working off-site for any reason, represent your company or office well. That company name goes with you wherever you go. And so maintain the same standards your company expects of you, even when you're off-site, off-location. The last thing I want to mention is, regardless of what other people might think, I think that the principles of etiquette, consideration, treating people with respect, being honest, being sincere, will serve you very, very well, both in the business world and in your personal life. So I encourage you to use those, to think about those, be aware, take them out, because I think we all came in here today with very, very good manners, and I hope that this was an opportunity to reinvest in bringing them to the forefront of our lives all the time. So I wish you all much success, both in your studies and in your careers, and thank you very much for coming today. So I know we ran a little bit over because we had some great questions during the program, so if some of you have to leave, please feel free. But for those of you who may still have a few more questions, there's about 15 minutes left. I'd be happy to take some more if there's any other questions. Yes, there's a gentleman right over here.
I just wanted to say also that your books are available. Her books are available outside for anybody who's leaving at this point and might want one.
There's some books for sale, and I will be signing afterwards. Thank you, Judy. Do you mind just grabbing the mic? It'll pick it up for the video recording.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is this working? Yes. Ms. Post, would you comment, please, on the read receipt request function for emails?
Sure.
Both the read receipt, both in terms of the sender and the receiver. I began my business career a long time ago, and the nature of my writings in many cases required certified return receipt requested.
Sure.
So I'm reluctant at times to use it for fear that I am implying a higher level of formality than necessary, but yet I want to be sure they got it and read it.
Sure.
Would you please comment on that?
Absolutely. This is a feature in email, if you're not familiar, where I know Outlook does it, I'm sure some other programs may as well, that essentially says when I send out an email, and please call me Anna, by the way, you're all invited. What is your name? Is Richard. Please call you Richard. So if I sent an email to Richard in this example, I might turn on a feature that says, please send, I don't remember exactly what the language is, but I'm essentially asking Richard to click a button when he gets his email. So Richard goes to open an email from me, and a screen pops up that says, send reply message read, basically saying, Anna would like to know that you've read this message. Can I go ahead and tell her that yes, you've read this message? That's the essence of the transaction that goes on here. I don't use the feature myself. I do know people who do. It's not usually anything that's too formal. It's not as though you're signing for a FedEx package and there's really any legality or other formality to it than that. I do suggest that some people use this for every email that they send. I find that a little bit annoying, to be quite honest. On the flip side, if there was something very timely that I was sending out and I needed to know that you really had already seen it, very time sensitive, then I think that's an appropriate use of it, in which case I'd suggest to Richard, when he gets my time sensitive email, that he not send the reply until he has read it, because I may start assuming something. If he just clicks yes, gets distracted and goes off for the rest of the day and heads home and hasn't read it, I might be working on an assumption that's not true from whatever information was in that email. So I would use common sense with it. In terms of senders, if it really is timely and you need to know, yes, use the feature. I do not recommend using it for every email sent. Vice versa, if someone's asked it of me, I usually figure there might be a reason. I try not to send until I have read it, though, to avoid committing myself to something that I don't mean to commit myself to. Does that help with your question? Terrific, great. Yes, lady right over here. Oh, give you the microphone.
Could you discuss the proper use of voicemail, both in responding to a request for information or requesting specific information if it's difficult to reach the person and then it's difficult for them to reach you again?
Can you be a little bit more specific for me? I just want to make sure I understand the question correctly. Using voicemail to communicate lots of information, complex information?
If you've been asked to answer a question, is it appropriate to answer that question, leave a message with the full answer, or say, I have the answer to your question, please call me, and then play telephone tag?
I would try, if it's at all possible, I would either give the full answer if it's a short one, and voicemail messages I think are best left about 30 seconds or less. That's not an official etiquette rule, but I know that's my own personal patience limit with them, because often I have to be transcribing the important message, then you have to go back and listen again. If you can leave the essence of the answer, yes, that's fine, so they get their answer quickly. It might be a response, yes, the report you wanted was dated March 12th. There is a little bit more information. Feel free to give me a call and I'll fill you in on the rest. That's sort of a most important part answered, but do call for more rather than leaving the long-winded there. Unless it's completely urgent, in which case it might be your only option. My preference is shorter when possible, though. It's a good question. I don't like the please call me, I have a question without any sense of what that is. I heard once that there's a technique in business, some type of passive-aggressive something, I'm not sure what, or dealing with passive people, or how to get a response. I forget. I'm sure it's a whole book devoted in self-help to it. It's a technique that says, hi, I have a question, give me a call, or I need to talk to you about something. The advice being that this will inspire someone to urgently want to know, they're so curious, what is it that they'll call back? I find the opposite tends to happen. I don't know what that's about, and then you sort of go out of mind. And I find it a little annoying. I don't know how to prepare for the call. So do let somebody know why you're calling. I'd like to talk to you about the spring report or whatever it might be. The subject, if you have a specific short question, ask that. I just need to know which system to file it under, whatever it might be. But something very, very long-winded requiring an intricate explanation, I'll give you the details, but I'm calling about XYZ. If you could let me know, I'll fill you in. Or if you could call me back, I'll fill you in. So try to keep it a little bit of tailored. It's a good word to use. Think about it that way. And as always, on any type of voicemail message, any information you feel someone may have to be writing down, try to use a speed of voice that allows the person to write it once rather than having to go back and do it again, especially phone numbers. Best advice is to leave your phone number at the beginning and again at the end of a message. Great. Any other questions? No? Well, I'll be here if anybody has others. Books are for sale. Thank you all again for coming this evening. It was a pleasure being here.